I'm reading from my notes because I'm very nervous. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. I'm here to talk to you about families and the mental health system. Initially, I'll start by saying I am the founder and the director of an online community called Families Healing Together. I am also the solitary staff person for the program. Director makes it sound like I have staff, but really it's just me. I'm going to do a quick, basic who, what, when, where about the program, and then I'll spend more time talking about the why of the program and why you might care about it. So, Families Healing Together is the name of the website, the program, and then there's a class called Recovering Our Families that is like the meat and potatoes of the program. So Recovering Our Families is an online class. It's facilitated by myself and a consistent team of 4 volunteers, all of whom identify as having the lived experience of both being directly in recovery in their own lives and also having a family member of someone someone in their family be in recovery as well. What it is an 8-week online program that teaches families about mental health recovery. Students engage with the material and one another in an online learning platform, and they read the material and they comment on it at their own pace, in their own time, over the course of the 8 weeks that they're registered. There are no live required meetings or specific times. Once they take the class, they're invited to continue to register for upcoming classes at no cost for as long as they find the support useful. So some people have taken the class like 15 times. They just keep registering, and because there's a lot of curriculum, it's hard for people to keep up and read it all. That's one reason they take it many times. The other reason people sometimes take it more than once is because wherever they are in their recovery journey impacts how they're experiencing the material. So people who've taken the class several times will often say, like, I totally missed that part the first time I took it, and now it has new meaning for me. When? The class is offered to the general public 6 times per year for a fee. They register and pay on the website. Sometimes treatment centers and mental health organizations will get grants to pay for their clients to take the class. Additionally, mental health organizations can commission the program to create closed private classrooms specifically for their clients and staff upon request. Where does it happen? It happens on a learning platform that's hosted on a private domain called mutual.support. Many of our students come from Australia through an organization called Helping Minds, from Canada through the Canadian Mental Health Association, and from North Carolina through Cooper Reese Healing Community. Is anyone from Cooper Reese here in the room? Yeah, hi. Cooper Reese has been with the program since the very beginning. Students from the general public who just find it through chance or word of mouth have come from South Africa, China, Indonesia, several European countries, New Zealand, Argentina, Chile, Canada, the United States, and Australia. Building an evidence base. In 2016, the University of Northern Colorado created an evaluation tool for the program and published research on the effectiveness of the course. It found that participants reported statistically significant gains in hopefulness towards recovery and capacity to support their family member. These 2 constructs have been consistently shown to be significant predictors of long-term recovery success. Those are 2 published papers. One is the evaluation. So an evaluation tool was created, data was collected, and the results were published. And the other one, so that one is quantitative, and the other one is qualitative. I'm amazed that 2 articles have been published on the program. Okay. An interesting thing about the research is that one of the researchers was a family member who took the class. When she graduated from the class, she asked if she could study the program. So together we created the evaluation tool, and she studied the class and collected the data with the help of 2 interns, and the 4 of us wrote a paper about it, and it was published. I learned a ton through that process. I think you say process in America. Through that process. For example, I learned that building an evidence base is very complicated and expensive. Her work with Families Healing Together had a value of over $45,000 in in-kind donations, both from her time and from the resources of the University of Northern Colorado. Family Outreach and Response Program in Toronto and the Foundation for Excellence in Mental Health Care each donated $10,000 to help us develop the evaluation tool. The researcher also created this slide, which is something that my brain would have never produced and is amazing to me. Yeah. So, okay. In the 7 years that the program has been running, over 1,000 families have participated in the program from all over the world. That I have been able to create and run this program has been amazing to me, and the fact that people have supported it in the kinds of ways that they have continues to amaze me. This is amazing to me because I am not a social worker, I am not a psychologist, or a therapist. I am none of those things. I'm not affiliated with any academic institutions. I have no background in business or social enterprise management or nonprofit management. I don't even have a university degree, college degree. I have a college diploma from Canada, a 2-year community college diploma. I was told at 16 that I would need to be on a disability pension for my whole life due to my psychosis and bipolar disorder. No one thought I would be ever doing this. Thank you. I want to share with you that the fact that I was supported enough financially in the first few years to turn the program from an idea seed into a real existing thing in the world is a miracle to me. Sorry. Thank you to Cooper Reese. Okay, let's try again, sorry. Thank you to Cooper Reese. Thank you to the Foundation for Excellence in Mental Health. And thank you to the Family Outreach and Response Program. The fact that this program still exists after 7 years and is self-sustaining is a miracle to me. The fact that people created an evaluation tool and researched it is a miracle to me. The fact that it has changed so many people's lives is a miracle to me. The fact that I am standing here talking to you about it is a miracle to me. And the fact that SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Health Administration, recently deemed it an emerging best practice is a miracle to me. My hands are shaking. Thank you so much for listening to me. Okay. So Families Healing Together is my baby. It's been my life's work for the past 7 years, and prior to those years, I was building the bedrock on which it grew. So really, I could say it's been my life work for the past 22 years. For me to be invited here to share this with you in this way is an honor that I'm deeply grateful for, and I will do my best, in spite of all my nerves, to make this worth your listening. I believe Our soul's voice is a transmission only we can give. We each have an integral piece of this humanity puzzle to share. I believe that our words matter a lot. I believe they carry a kind of cosmic currency. So thank you for letting me share mine with you. Truthfully, I would rather be anywhere than up here right now. So you may hear my voice crack and see my hand shake, or I may take an unusual pause. And I want you to know that these are symptoms of me sharing my heart and unleashing my soul's voice publicly, which I'm learning how to do that every day more and more. And it is thrilling. And I love being alive. I'm not a problem to be solved. Neither are you. I never was. Neither were you. As I mentioned, I was initiated into this work quite honestly. When I was 16 years old, I was diagnosed with psychosis and bipolar disorder. For me, it was a spiritual experience gone wrong. At the time, I was forcibly treated, and my family responded in the way families are taught to respond in the mental health system. They became wardens of sort, controlling me to keep me safe. The treatment team told them to make sure I stayed on my medication and that I would always need psychiatric support because I had a biological brain disease which would be debilitating for my whole life. You've all heard this story before. They told my family that even if they were able to keep me on the medications, it was likely that I would have more psychotic episodes. Can't win. My family was prepared for me to have a lifelong disability, and naturally our relationship changed as a result of all of this. I didn't ever embrace the diagnosis. I didn't believe it was true for me. I still do not identify with the diagnosis, though I can see why the way I experienced life was put into that box. After my hospitalization, my teenage self became distanced from my family, and I didn't experience them as a source of support in the same way I had previously. Our relationship changed. What my family learned in their meetings with the social workers and groups they attended was how to care for their mentally ill daughter. I didn't think they had a mentally ill daughter, so this created a relational problem. We lost a shared sense of reality. They were not taught how to understand my altered experiences. They were not given tools to communicate and connect with me when I was in altered states. They were not taught hope-inspiring strategies. They weren't taught to expand themselves to accommodate mental diversity and different ways of experiencing and expressing life. And they were not taught that my future could be promising and still hold great things. They were essentially taught that the symptoms and the medical treatment of bipolar disorder would take over my life, and they would always have to be on guard so that they could somehow protect me from my next imminent psychotic experience. Under this education, they told me that I had to take the medication and follow the rules of the treatment team or they'd kick me out of the house. Of course they told me that. They loved me and cared about me, and they wanted to do right by me. They didn't want me to be psychotic again. They were listening to the doctors. I was on and sometimes secretly off the medication from the time I was 16 to 18 while still living under their roof. I hated the diagnosis and I hated the meds. When I was 18, I moved out of the house, went to community college to study to become a sign language interpreter, and went off the medication for good. From that point forward, I didn't access mental health services as a patient anymore, from 18 on. I got pregnant at 19, and I left the American Sign Language Interpreting Program to spend time with my baby. I still experienced altered states, but I found ways to be with them. Let me clarify. I still do experience altered states that would be labeled psychosis. They sometimes sneak up on me when I least expect it. In fact, yesterday morning when I looked in the mirror, I saw a Fibonacci sequence of sacred geometry in my eyes. You can imagine that would catch me off guard. But it didn't scare me exactly. It did something to me, but it didn't scare me, because I know what it means to me. I generally don't desire to talk about these experiences with anyone. I know that a lot of people get a lot out of talking about these kinds of experiences with others, but it's not something that I desire. It's between me and my soul, and me and God. I live very well. I have a beautiful life peppered with synchronicities and magic, and very wild ups. For those of you who know me in the room, very wild ups and downs. And I feel like I've fought really hard to have the personal freedom that I feel in my heart. And today my parents are proud of me, especially in more recent years, and I'm even able to feel close to them again. But this isn't about that, although I've spent a lot of time talking about that. And it's not about my personal story or my personal family story. What I want this to be about is us as helping professionals and how we can help keep families connected. This is about all of us, because we are all, after all, part of some kind of family, whether or not we like it. I'm going to take a quick departure. My friend Bojena drew this picture. Her artwork is in a few places in the online class. She drew the picture in the previous slide as well. This one is about 10 years old. It's a picture of me and my 2 kids. I have 3 kids now, but this was drawn 10 years ago before the littlest was born. And at this time, the kids were 8 and 3. The one in the yellow shirt, my middle child, struggles with mental health and interfaces with the mental health system now. She's transgendered. She's 13 years old. I learned that she was transgendered last year when she told me that even though she has a boy's body, she's definitely not a boy. She doesn't go by the boy name she was given at birth anymore, and she's named herself a female name of her own choosing. Her journey continues to unfold, as do all of ours. I bring this up because it's fascinating to me. People are always changing. The kids in this picture are entirely different beings now. Parenting is like that. You can never know your children in a way because they're constantly changing. So I believe our job as parents is to be extremely present to them, in the present moment with them. You can only ever actively know someone in the moment that you're in with them. No one can predict who you will be next year or 5 years from now, and certainly not for a person's whole life. No one can predict if you will or won't need meds, and no one can predict what you will or won't be capable of. If you have a baby, no one can even predict that child's gender. Life is mysterious, and the human journey is a wild guru. The questions I always try to ask myself raising my 3 kids now are these. How do you experience the world? Who are you right now? What can I offer you from this limited space of the universe that I operate from? How can I help you be more fully who you are? And these are all questions that I want families to ask their loved ones too, or psychiatrists to ask their patients, or friends to ask their sisters, anybody to ask anyone, really. This is a slide, a random slide I chose for the recovery model, because I'm sure we all know what it is in this room. There are millions of slides of the recovery model from different countries, from organizations, many articles. Lots of people's time, money, and energy has been funneled into this thing called the recovery model. So if I have a thesis, so to speak, for this talk, it would basically be that families benefit from learning about this model. Learning that it exists allows them to demand better. It gives them something to mobilize around, and it helps them to hold the system more accountable. By default, families will learn about the medical model understanding a mental illness. That's just entrenched in the culture. Even in countries who've adopted the recovery model as their guiding way of delivering mental health services, the medical model perspective is well represented and widely available. Any basic internet search on terms like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder will reveal many articles representing the medical perspective. I believe that families need exposure to the mental health recovery model to give them a wider, broader understanding of the complex issues involved in extreme distress and healing. In the past 40 years or so, the recovery model has expanded, grown, become trendy. Some say been co-opted, but it's also made great strides. The experts by experience and the peer workforce have made an impact and continue to make an impact. Yesterday, in Berta's incredibly moving and beautiful keynote talk, one of the sad things she shared was that in her career, she felt that only after she had omitted some of her personal truth could she get work. Her lived experience of psychiatric treatment and her difference was something that seemingly made her less valued as a person in the workforce. I am exactly 30 years her junior, and my experience in the mental health workforce was that my lived experience and my difference was a credential. It had value. And that's progress, and that is hopeful to me. Change is slow, but it's happening. So a question I have for all of you bright, compassionate people in the room who care about life, liberty, and the pursuit of wholeness in extreme states is this. In your experience, does the mental health system leverage the wisdom of the recovery model in how it interacts with families? Yeah. Can you, not to be crass, but can you imagine how much money has been spent on the recovery model? How many great minds have written, we have this gigantic body of work about the recovery model, and families don't even know what it is. Why is that happening? Like really, why is that happening? So, at 18 years old, I left my family home and I left behind my identity as a psychiatric patient. I was free to stop seeing the psychiatrist and free to be completely off the meds now that I no longer lived at home. I went to a 2-year community college program and studied social service work, and when I graduated and began looking for a job, I would have been happy to accept any job that paid my bills. I had a 1-year-old baby, and I was 23 years old. I didn't care too much what the job was. I just wanted a job that helped people somehow, and I wanted to pay off my student loans. I looked on the Charity Village website, and I saw a job posting that said psychiatric survivors encouraged to apply. And the job was to be a family support drop-in worker for a psychiatric survivor-run drop-in center. What is that term? Psychiatric survivor. I had never heard it. I saw those words together, and I was like I felt my posture change when I read the words. I was like, that's what I'm that. Like, that's a thing that I hadn't really had a lot of experiences of fitting in. And when I saw that, I was like, wow. So obviously I applied for that job, and I was angry about my experiences at the time when I was hospitalized and all of that happened. But basically, I had kind of repressed the experience because it wasn't part of my life anymore. I felt it was over. I'd moved on. I didn't see psychiatrists or social workers anymore. No one in my college classes knew I had a history. My family knew I was off my meds at that point, and they were leaving me alone. I seemed to be doing fine, so they couldn't complain. So technically, I could just leave it all behind me. I could have ended up getting a job it could have been anything. It it ended up being mental health because of that term, psychiatric survivor, that I saw, and I was like, yes. So obviously I hadn't really moved on, or those words wouldn't have affected me in the way they did. It was an interesting job because often people who work in the psychiatric survivor movement are not necessarily on board with family groups or family interventions. In fact, my colleagues spoke pretty disparagingly about traditional family programs in my community. There is a divisiveness between psychiatric survivor organizations and family groups. Psychiatric survivors have been highly skeptical of family involvement in the recovery movement. Often survivors have felt controlling, paternalistic, and traumatizing experiences in their own families, and then add to that larger family advocacy organizations tending to advocate for coercion and forced treatment. So I was in this weirdly anomalous position to run a family program in a psychiatric survivor drop-in center. I was eager to start running family groups, but I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. I had no curriculum. I was fresh out of college. I didn't know what I was doing. So I visited some of these traditional family support groups in effort to build partnerships, understand my job a little more, and see what their curriculum looked like. I saw firsthand why my mad colleagues felt the way they did. Sometimes in these meetings, families would share horror stories. They would wallow in despair. They would speak about their family member in ways that I found personally disrespectful. And no one seemed to shift the conversation in any hopeful direction at all. And once, I even heard families strategizing different ways to sneak medications to their loved ones in their food so that they wouldn't even know they were taking it. And the facilitator of the group didn't comment and allowed that conversation to continue. When I went to family conferences run by these traditional family programs, there were pharmaceutical companies with their poster boards and swag everywhere. Needless to say, I was really put off by this. It was evident I had to find some way to develop something different than what was already out there. I Googled endlessly, and eventually I found the work of Karen Baker, who was running a subversive family program right in the belly of the beast of the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. CAMH, as it's known, is Canada's largest mental health teaching hospital and one of the world's leading research centers. Karen was running this small nonprofit family program called Family Outreach and Response, and CAMH had donated office space to her to run the program. This is Karen and I. I love her very deeply. She developed a curriculum that taught families about recovery, and she was running groups, and I asked her if I could mentor with her, and I commuted at night after my workday at the drop-in center had ended to participate in her evening family mental health recovery series. I learned all about mental health recovery, the mental health recovery model in her group, and saw how she applied that information to families. Eventually, I got a job working with her and was able to co-develop and share all sorts of curriculum with families about recovery. This is us in the summer. I'm deeply grateful to her for mentoring me and for doing all the work she did with families. My children and I love her deeply. In 2007, I went to my first ever conference that I had to get on a plane to go to. It was an INTAR conference, which stands for the International Network Towards Alternatives in Recovery, and it was in Gabriel Island in British Columbia in Canada. Meeting that group of people in 2007 changed my life dramatically. Was anyone there, by chance, in the room? 2007 INTAR conference? Okay.
I was here before.
Were you? Okay.
Ireland.
Yeah, Ireland, right. I heard all the details of that one, but I wasn't there. Okay. I was powerfully moved by so many passionate people in one room who cared about recovery. I joined INTAR, and I volunteered as a coordinating body member. Will Hall, the creator of Madness Radio, and I teamed up to build INTAR's website. And my Toronto colleagues and I worked with INTAR to host an international recovery conference in Toronto in 2008 called Action on Alternatives. Were any of you at that one by chance? No, okay. We hosted 26 paid speakers from 6 different countries, and we broke even. That had nothing to do with me. I didn't even know what was going on with the finances, but I just heard that we broke even. We were creating ripple effects in our community in big ways. I also attended an ISPS conference that very same year. It was the 9th annual meeting, and it was called Recovery from Psychosis, Healing Through Relationship. One module in the online class that I teach is called Building Relationship Amidst Psychosis, and it was entirely developed from the material I learned at that conference. I admired organizations like Intentional Peer Support, the Icarus Project, Madness Radio, the Copeland Center, the National Empowerment Center, ISPS, and INTAR, and people who were doing innovative things and exploring new concepts in madness and recovery. And I wanted to share all of it with families. I'm going to bring some words in now from Karen Baker, my mentor. This is from an article she wrote in a book called Alternatives Beyond Psychiatry. It was published in 2007. She says, families of those recovering from serious mental health issues are probably one of the largest groups within the mental health, are probably one of the last groups within the mental health community to embrace the vision of recovery. Their experience of the mental health system is one of despair, hopelessness, helplessness, and alienation, isolation, and discrimination. Families are often told by psychiatrists and family support programs to grieve the loss of their loved one and to lower all expectations of their relative's future and to make sure their family member takes their medications. This leads to a family environment that does not necessarily promote recovery, but rather may hinder the recovery process. How can a family nurture a recovery atmosphere when they feel their lives are full of hopelessness, sadness, anger, and power struggles? Traditionally, family support and education programs focused on teaching families about diagnosis, symptoms, medical treatments, mental health resources, crisis intervention, communication skills, and self-care. There is little, if any, mention of recovery and no critical examination of the mental health system from a trauma-informed and anti-oppressive perspective. These programs created like-minded thinking between families and mental health professionals, which further reinforced the limiting idea that mental illness is a disease and must be treated with medication, or otherwise recovery is not possible. Family Outreach and Response course content is based on the research and stories of what psychiatric survivors said they needed to recover. They said they needed hope. They said they needed self-determination. They said they needed choice. They said they needed education. And they said they needed support. That was published in 2007. 11 years later, I am still left with these questions. How does this system that seemingly embraces recovery treat families? What are they taught about today? And what gets labeled mental illness? And where is the literature on families and mental health recovery? Well, not much. Not much literature. Because recovery-oriented family programs are still emerging. It's relatively new. I heard Dr. Joanne Nicholson say in a talk once that it takes 15 years from the time of developing a new intervention to building an evidence base for it. And that's assuming you have resources and institutional and academic support. I'm telling you, there's a big opportunity for a researcher interested in this stuff to study the connection between families and the mental health recovery model, because there truly isn't much written on the topic. And I know this because I had to do a literature review for the paper we published. And I also know this because I wanted to share research with you in this talk. But mostly, all I could find was a few tiny journal articles by a researcher who I've never met before, named Andrea Rupert from Australia. She was kind enough to send me a few of her articles when I reached out to her over the internet, on Facebook no less. This quote is from an article published in Biomed Central Health Services Research entitled Family-Focused Practice Within a Recovery Framework, Practitioners' Qualitative Perspectives, published in 2017. She confirmed the conclusion that I, too, had arrived at. There isn't much written on the topic. She says, there were other authors, too, but she's just the one I know her name. But they're down there. Their names are there. She says, internationally, the emphasis on family-focused practice and likewise recovery in mental health service policies is increasing. While much conceptual work has been done on family-focused practice and recovery separately, how the two concepts are intertwined and related is at present unclear. While many mental health services subscribe to a philosophy of family-focused practice, there's a dearth of evidence about how family-focused practice is translated into practice, especially within a recovery framework. Defining and implementing family-focused practice within a recovery framework is vague and not well understood. A soundly developed conceptual framework of recovery-oriented, family-focused practice grounded in the lived experiences of those with mental health care needs and families is needed to establish practice standards and inform professional development. There it is. I completely concur. I'm nearing the end. A brief bit more on the trajectory of the Recovering Our Families program. When I became pregnant with my third child, I decided to leave working in mental health recovery and instead to live my own mental health recovery. I was worn down. I was tired. I was divorced, single parenting, at one time working 4 jobs, and struggling financially in a very expensive, busy city. I wanted simplicity. I became a minimalist. I got rid of all of my belongings, except clothes and basic needs, but basically I got rid of all my stuff. I fell into infatuation that I thought was love with a 7-foot-tall man who was a mad genius who sold lasers for a living online. And the kids and I moved to Costa Rica with him to have our baby and live a jungle life. I was a trained yoga teacher at the time, so I thought maybe I'd do that for work. But I really wasn't sure. The plan was unclear, but I felt called to go there. Friends and family, of course, worried I was psychotic. Karen Baker even worried I was psychotic. The father of my third child had addiction issues that I could not handle. Because I had my hands full with the 3 kids, as it was already, I decided to leave him when the baby was 8 months old. My 1-year maternity leave that the Canadian government was funding, yep, we do that, was coming to an end. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I knew I wanted to keep living the simple life in Costa Rica. I wanted to stay in my little jungle town. I had found a very deep healing there through the power of breath work and through the flora and the fauna and the ocean and the stars. I needed to explore that more. Plus, it was easier being a single mom of 3 kids in the jungle than it would have been in the city of Toronto. I vowed to find a way to stay there. I was traveling with the kids, renewing my visa. I was doing a visa run to Panama when I got the epiphany to take the work that we had developed at Family Outreach and Response and turn it into an online program so that people all over the world could access the curriculum instead of just our Toronto community. It made so much sense. Our international colleagues were always asking us to share our work, but we weren't really organized enough to create a mechanism to do that. We also weren't we were publicly funded, and it wasn't in our public mandate to do education in that way. We were funded to do direct service work. So I wrote a proposal and gave it to the Family Outreach and Response Program, and they told me that they would fund it if I found someone to match them. So they were like, we'll give you half of that. You find somebody else to cough up the other half, and we'll help make this happen. So the Foundation for Excellence in Mental Health stepped up to the plate. And for the first 2 years, while the program was getting going, it was supported by these two organizations. The pilot class was born in September 2012. I wrote it in the jungle, in my cabin. It was a very beautiful time for me doing that. And I'm really lucky that I got to do that. For the first few years while the program was getting going, it was hard, but it was funded. A couple of questions I'd like you to consider. Oops. How can we adapt existing interventions to add more recovery literature, education and support, and recovery concepts into care? What are the naturally occurring resources available in your communities and your hospitals and your organizations and your families that can be leveraged to teach people about mental health recovery? I want to say that if anyone in this room is interested in taking the recovery class, the online recovery class, please contact me. I'll put my email address up at the end of this, and you'll be enrolled in the January 15 class at no cost to you, as my gift to you for listening, and as my hope for you that you'll find ways to take the material and spread it. How much time do I have left? Okay, good, okay. So I'm going to go over what we talk about in the class. So there are 8 lessons, but in every lesson there are, sub-lessons. So in lesson 1, it's like introductions. It covers the role of family in recovery, the difficult feelings that mental health challenges can evoke individually and within the family, and it offers a meditation practice for transforming challenging, strong emotions into compassion. And that's an introduction to the tenets of family mental health recovery. In the second week, lesson 2, we explore recovery fundamentals. Some of you may have had training like this in your jobs. So we explore definitions. There are a lot of definitions of mental health recovery. We talk about what people might be recovering from besides their symptoms, barriers to recovery, like oppression, poverty, recovery as a life journey, and we talk about identifying strengths and challenges across life areas for individuals and family members. There are worksheets that you download, and it's a whole thing. Lesson 3, understanding mental health. We focus on examining our beliefs about mental illness, challenges, and recovery, exploring recovery as a universal human experience. So we ask families, what have you had to recover from? Think of a time in your life when you had to recover from something, because everyone has had to recover from something. And what did you need? Because whatever they say is the same stuff. I needed friends, I needed education, I needed support, someone to listen. It's all the same stuff that people in mental health recovery need. We talk about challenges and turnaround people and turnaround environments in this lesson. I hope this works. So I want to show, oh, I think it's going to work, a video. So you get the mic. So we'll go back to week 3 when we can get some help playing that video. But in week 4, we talk about harnessing the power of hope. This is my favorite of all of the lessons. We talk about learned helplessness and how people develop that and why they develop that. We make a case for cultivating hope. Like, why is it valuable? Like, it feels good, sure, but like, why else is it valuable to cultivate the skill of hopefulness in yourself? And then we talk about how to develop a personal hope practice, because it doesn't come naturally. I mean, especially when things are hard, it doesn't come naturally to be hopeful. In lesson 5, we talk about using a strengths-based approach. We use worksheets, and the worksheets kind of guide families to think about their relative from all the different virtues that they may have. So the DSM is like a book of pathology, and then we kind of flip that on its head and use a book of virtues and strengths and say, well, which ones of these, if you're going to classify your relative, which ones of these can you see? That's one of my favorite worksheets in the class too. In lesson 6, we had the one that I mentioned that was developed from my experience being at a conference like this one here. It was in New York. I think the workshop I went to was called Healing Happens in Relationship or something, but I furiously took notes, and from that breakout room, created this lesson for the class. So the lesson is basically how to connect and communicate with somebody when they're having an extreme state. In lesson 7, we talk about creating healthy boundaries. I mean, it's kind of dry to look at this when you're not seeing the kinds of conversations it elicits, because that's where it's really rich. Like, to just see it like this, and that doesn't come up to life the way it does when people are doing it. But the boundaries one is really, everybody has a lot to say about that. About how hard it is to set boundaries, or how they set a boundary and then their relative's not talking to them anymore, or about, there's endless things you can talk about with boundaries. And then we talk about letting go of attachment, basically. Like, you're attached to this idea of who you think your relative should be. How do you let go of that? Because that's not serving you to have this attachment in your head of who they should be. Or grieving who they could have been, or like, you have to let go of that because you want to appreciate them for who they are. And they're right there in front of you. And they're not a problem to be solved. And in the last lesson, we celebrate recovery stories. So there's an audio recording of Will Hall, myself, and a man by the name of Krista MacKinnon talking about our personal recovery stories. And then we link to places on the internet where people are telling their recovery stories. And then families are invited to talk about theirs if they want to. Their personal recovery story, not the recovery story of their relative, but their recovery story, which sometimes sounds like, I was very controlling, it took over my life, then I learned that I needed to let them be who they were, and I finally set some really difficult boundaries, and it's very painful, but that's part of their recovery story. But family members have recovery stories because they're living in the chaos of mental distress. So they're in recovery from the chaos of mental distress. And so we celebrate those stories, which are ongoing, and they, you know, from birth to death, right? So I think this is the last thing I'm saying. Yeah, this is it. So I want to leave you, yes, thank you. I want to leave you, I'll ask these questions, you can read them, but I'll ask them, and then we get to watch the video now, so that's cool. How can we adapt? Like, I want you to think about your social location in the world. Like, where do you work? What kind of privilege do you have? I have an immense amount of privilege, like a shameful amount is how I feel about it sometimes. So, and probably a lot of you do too. So think about that, and then think about how you can adapt the existing interventions that you see in your environment to add more recovery literature, education, and support concepts into care for families specifically, because they don't get it. Like, it's not given to them. It's like hoarded or something. It's really weird. And what are the naturally occurring resources available in your community, hospital, organization that can be leveraged to teach families about recovery? And my program is your program, so you're welcome to take it for free and spread it to anybody that you want to. And so I think this might work now, but yeah, so thank you, and I would love to hear anything from anyone.